Hey guys, with the lunar eclipse coming up, I wanted to give you a few tips for shooting the moon and getting the best possible results. Tip number one is to use a longer focal length. So depending on the type of photo you're going for, I recommend something between 100 and 600. If you're trying to include some foreground in your shot, then you're gonna wanna go on the wider range. And if you just wanna isolate the moon, then you wanna go on the tighter range so you don't have to crop the photo a ton and lose some of the resolution. You can also rent one of these lenses from a company like Lens Rentals instead of having to go buy one if you're just shooting something like the moon with a longer focal length and frequently. Tip number two is to use a sturdy tripod and a ball head, and also make sure that everything is locked down really tight, including the camera plate, whether that's attached to the actual camera or the lens. Using longer lenses like this, they're usually pretty heavy, and any slight tilt or movement from the camera and the lens is gonna result in blurry photos. So make sure everything is nice and tight down before you start firing off your shots. Tip number three is gonna be to use a remote when you're shooting the moon using a telephoto lens. These lenses are usually pretty heavy again, so any touch of the camera is gonna shake the lens and the camera significantly. It's gonna take a few seconds for it to stabilize. So if you don't have a remote, you can use a self timer or a shutter delay, but make sure it's at least a few seconds between the time that you touch the shutter and it actually takes the photo. Tip number four is dialing in focus. To get the best focus, switch the camera to live view and zoom all the way in on the moon as far as you can, and then go back and forth on the focus ring until you see the most amount of detail. This will ensure that your image is going to be as sharp as possible. Tip number five is to use a faster shutter speed. When you're using a telephoto lens, you're going to need to go faster so that you don't get any trails in stars or the moon with the Earth's rotation. Contrary to most people's belief, you're not using a long exposure for all astro. When you're shooting directly at a light source like the moon, you do need a faster shutter speed to get the proper exposure. Right now I'm at 1/80th of a second and I'm at 500 millimeters on my lens. Now as the eclipse starts to happen, the moon will get darker and you'll need to adjust your settings during the different phases of the eclipse. Tip number six is to use an app like Photopill to plan for where your moon will be in relation to the foreground. This is handy if you want to blend your moon shot back in with your foreground. You'll typically need to take two separate shots as you're going to be focused on two different points for the foreground and for the moon. Hopefully you guys found these tips helpful. If you do get out and take some shots of the lunar eclipse, please tag me on Instagram so I can check out your results.